Greetings, all my iconic individuals, and sorry for the lack of uploads recently. I've been extra busy, but don't worry, I have another video after this one you're currently watching, coming in hopefully not too soon from now, but probably not another month wait if that's what you're worried about. Anyways, the point of this video is Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods, is a movie that I just watched, and it was surprisingly great. I mean, not that I necessarily expected it to be bad or anything, since the first Shazam movie was good, but, you know, superhero movies these days have just become very hit or miss in general. But fear not, this is one of the good ones. I even gave it a perfect score on Letterboxd, although in retrospect, maybe I should have given it like an almost perfect score, but either way, it doesn't really matter. I don't really know anyone else's opinions on this movie so far, since it just came out, and I don't really take the critics' opinions very seriously these days. In fact, I've never really taken them very serious in general, but that's a long story for a different time. The point is, I haven't heard any reviews from anyone credible yet, so I don't know if this movie is like hated by the internet or generally agreed upon to be good. But if you trust my opinion, and I hope that you would, I think that you should go and watch this movie. And why should you watch this movie? Well, I'll tell you a few good reasons why. One, it's more Zachary Levi as Shazam. I mean, what else do I need to say? It's pretty much a perfect casting right there. Two, it has a great superhero family dynamic. The kind of thing that, like, the Fantastic Four are famous for, yet none of the actual Fantastic Four movies managed to do right for some reason.
Gotta say, it's fantastic.
This movie actually manages to expand upon and develop all the characters from the original movie in interesting new ways without ever having to shaft Billy or Freddy from the original. Reason 2, it's pretty clever and witty. I will admit, it's not quite as funny as the first movie, but it's significantly more well written than a lot of other superhero movies these days. One of the best jokes in the movie involves one of the characters reading a letter from the Shazam gang, although I don't think there's any footage of it in the trailer, so you'll just have to take my word for that. 3, the villains are pretty good. Not like super amazing, in-depth, morally gray characters, but just good villains. It's hard to explain why or how, but there's a good dynamic between the sisters in this movie. Reason 4, it's visually interesting. And now this is a interesting point I bring up, mostly because aren't all superhero movies visually interesting? Well, I would argue against that point, since the vast majority of them take place in boring city-like locations. And, well, that's not very interesting, is it? Especially not when we've seen it for the 50th time. And yes, I know what you're already telling me, but this movie also takes place in a city. And yes, I do acknowledge that. But the locations in the city that they actually go to are shot in a more interesting manner. And that's not the only locations in this movie. There's a lot more of the Shazam lair and the world of the ancient Greek gods as well. 5, I think that this movie is a good sequel in the sense that it follows up well from the first movie and continues on ideas and themes found in it, some of which I've already mentioned, but also other things that you wouldn't really think about, like how seemingly inconsequential actions in the first movie have a dramatic effect on the characters' lives in this movie, such as when Shazam broke the staff in the original movie, or just the very fact that he gave all his siblings powers. These are the kind of things that not only make this movie more interesting, but retroactively make the original movie more interesting, as it now shows that these things that happened in the first movie had real consequences and meaning to them. And in my opinion, most of the best sequels are the ones that end up retroactively making the original movies better. And lastly, it also has some pretty good themes in here too. Of course, I already mentioned the whole family dynamic stuff, which was a big part of the first movie and is continued in this one. But they also do some interesting stuff with how all the different kids in the family want to do their own things, but Billy starts becoming a bit too controlling of them. And it plays out in a fairly interesting way in my opinion. However, Billy's actions do make sense since he is still a kid after all. He hasn't learned how to be a good leader yet. He lacks the world knowledge of those older than him, or the experience of people who already have leadership roles, like Bruce Wayne. So this kind of story could only really be explored from his perspective, and it wouldn't work as well with other DC characters. It's not the deepest movie ever written, but it's highly entertaining and pretty well paced, and I'd give it a high recommendation personally. Of course, it isn't flawless though. There's a couple of fairly minor, nitpicky things I could bring up, and there's this relatively pointless scene near the end involving unicorns, but, you know, I don't want to say too much and spoil fulfill the plot. Some may also argue that there's a bit of a cop-out near the end. My point being that the flaws in this movie are not big enough to detract from the quality that's to be found elsewhere. And even though the DC universe is kind of hitting a bit of a dead end soon and sort of soft rebooting, probably for the better, this movie is fairly standalone along with the original Shazam, and it will probably age better because of that, since they're very loosely connected to the whole DC universe in the first place. Apparently, this movie is a box office bomb, and if you don't want to go see it just because it's a box office bomb, well then, must I bring up The Legend of Treasure Planet, one of Disney's greatest movies that bombed at the box office, yet has been reappraised as time has gone on, and seen for the masterpiece that it truly is. And by some people anyways. The point being, just because a movie bombs at the box office doesn't mean that it is necessarily bad. In fact, most of the time, a movie bombs because it was not properly marketed. And that, unfortunately, is pretty much the case when it comes to this movie. Anyways, that's about it. Go watch Shazam 2 right now, and always remember to be iconic. Oh, and also a shout out to my patrons and channel members, T. Ike, Edward P., Samir A., and Macabre Mole.